Okay, this is the hard part of our coding. If we go back to this, the else part. So what we've done is, if the list data was empty, we put an item into it. Our next problem is the else part, because if it's got an item in it, we need to go through this routine of finding where our current position is, what we need to do to insert it. And that's not an easy task to think about. So I'll go through it slowly with you if I can. The first thing we need to do is set up our current position to look at the very first item in the list. Now we're only in the else part if there is an item in the list. So if we had an empty list to begin with, we would never be here. So we know that there is an item in the list. There might be one, there may be 1,000, who knows. But what we're going to do is we're going to set up our variable current position and set it to equal 0. So we're looking at the very first item in the list. And now we've got to loop through. We've got to do the same thing each time. So we've got a loop. So we're going to check whether Frank is bigger than David, whether Frank is bigger than Eric, whether Frank is bigger than Mark. We're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. So that is our while loop. While. Now, what we need to do is really check this current position. We're not really bothered about inserting stuff into it at the moment. All we need to do is find out the position of where we need to insert it. So I'm going to check, first of all, this problem back here, if we've reached the end of the table. That is my first check that I'm going to be doing. So while the current position is less than, well, if we think back to when we did this, we found list length. So if I got 5 items in my table, list length would be equal to 5. So really list length is a pointer to the end of the table. So I can check if I've reached the end of the table just by seeing if the value of current position is less than the whole length of the list. But that's not all. Remember that we needed to do this piece if we have not found it yet. So we know how long the list is, but we may not have found it, and if we haven't found it, then we need to append again. So I'm just going to type and not found. And if you remember back here, we set found to be false. In other words, we haven't found it. So this loop is going to keep going through while we haven't reached the end of the list, while the current position is less than the list. And just in case it is the length of the list, we need to find out whether we've actually found the position that we need to insert it in. That is quite a challenge to take on board and understand. It's not easy, but bear with me, it will work. So what happens if the current position is less than the list length and we haven't found it? Well, what we need to do, if we think about it, if we're here, the current position is 0, it's less than the list length, which is 3. So 0 is less than 3, and we haven't found the position yet at all. How do we know to say whether we found a position or not? We need to check whether data item Frank is bigger than David, and if it is, move on the current pointer or insert it in that position. So that is what I'm going to type in now. So if the item, which is Frank, is less than or equal to, now item was a string, Frank, but David isn't, I can't just say data because it won't know what I mean. I've got to find out what happens at that position. So the list is called data, and the position it's in is current position, which is 0 to begin with, and that is now looking at the word David. If item is less than or equal to David, well, maybe we need to change that for greater than. The only difference between greater and less than here is the order of the list. Are we going to order it from Z to A or A to Z? So if the item is bigger, then what we need to do is this: set the current position to 1. So we're just moving on the current position, and I can say that just by current, whoops, there's 2 R's not 2 U's, current position is equal to current position, which is 0 plus 1. Now that's a bit of a mouthful. As a programmer, we can shorten that. We've used the word current position twice. We can shorten that to just plus equals 1. So if I take that out, put a plus there, take that out, that is exactly the same statement. Okay, so that says current position is equal to current position plus 1. But I've got an if here. If the data item is bigger. Well, what happens if it isn't bigger? Well, if it isn't bigger, then I've found where I need to insert it. So I can just put else. Ooh, that's not good. I can just put else found equals true. So if it isn't, I'm going to move on the current position. I'm going to move it up, and if I get to this point here where it isn't bigger, then I'm going to say, well, I found where I need to put it. So that's basically my loop running through each item in the list and looking for the current position. All I've got to do now is actually insert it into that place. So we'll look at that in the next video. Before we go there, we might as well sort of save it and try to run it. We may end up with 1 or 2 errors. No, we didn't. It just didn't do anything at all, which is okay. So next video we're going to look at inserting data into our list.